And so hopefully you can refer to this later or others can. So let me share my screen and we're going to go through this. I'm hoping it'll take a little over an hour and I'm going to try to whip through it relatively quickly. You can always go back. All of you have your opportunities to turn off your screens, relax, go get a drink, walk away, or say, I've had enough and go do something else. But
how long do you think it will last, Eliza?
I'm guessing about an hour. I may be over that, you know, plus Q&A.
Oh.
I haven't actually run it depends just how fast I talk. So, and it's better to have the Q&A at the end just because it will slow us all down, as I said, if I try to answer questions in the middle. So, okay, so let's get started. I'm going to share this screen and we'll see what happens. And hopefully I'll keep my eye on the participants part so that I can let other people in as they come in. Okay, so this is my marvelous spelling bee judge or pronouncer training. Okay, as I said, I'm not a big PowerPoint artist, so do you expect to be bored by that? There's going to be a lot of text and it's going to be a lot of me. So here we go. Okay, so my basic function, as you see here with my three little titles for the judge and pronouncer training is to orient everyone, including coordinators who are running programs, who are training judges and pronouncers. So this for all three levels of B officials, coordinators, judges, pronouncers. In my previous training back in November, for coordinators, I didn't go into much about how a B functions and how the officials function. So that's really what I'm going to go into now. I want to discuss about obviously the pronouncer and judges, their roles, and they are very specific and not to be mixed up. I've seen it when they've mixed up, and go through a rules review and sticky scenarios. You know, I don't want you to use this and never look at the rules again. That would be a mistake, but just sort of to give you your guide and hopefully give you a couple of shortcuts. Okay, here we go. So me, I'm a volunteer with Fairfax County Council PTA. I've been a PTA volunteer at Flint Hill Elementary School in Vienna, at Thoreau Middle School, and at Madison High School. I don't work for Scripps, I never have. I just started as a school volunteer, got sucked into the bee. I can tell you my first experience was horrendous. We survived and, and then it worked on after that. So FCC PTA sponsors the bee in our area, and we get support from local businesses and charities to pay Scripps to be a sponsor. As I said, I used to run the bee at Flint Hill Elementary and at Thoreau. I'm actually running the bee now at Sunrise Valley Elementary School in Reston, just to pitch in. If you ever need any help, my email's right there. You can find me. I try to be very responsive. If I can't answer your question via email, we can have a phone call. It is very easy to schedule that, and I'm pretty flexible. So, so topics. Number one, the elephant in the room, which is dominating our lives, is COVID's impact and how you're going to hold your bee, which also will affect how many officials you may or may not need. The basics of an oral spelling bee. I'm going to go over the roles of the bee pronouncer and judges, how a pronouncer should prepare, how a judge should prepare, the finer points. This entire presentation is really a rules review in many ways. It's what I'm giving you is taken straight from the rules for spelling bees without going through the fine print. But there are some aspects of that, such as appeals and the end of bee procedure, where I am going to refer to that fine print in the rules because it's important for me to refer to those details, but you really need to look at the details yourself. So session structure, as I said, me talk. That's going to be part one and an awful lot of it, and I apologize. Part two is going to be your Q&A. So if you can put any questions that come up into the chat, that'll save us time and we can tack it on at the end, and maybe it'll be hopefully I'll be able to answer some of those questions. They will come up in the middle of the presentation, and so you won't have any questions at the end. And if you see any spelling or grammar errors, sorry. Typing away an awful lot of it. Okay, first thing, dealing with COVID. So obviously, if you're holding in-person bee, any local health guidelines are going to affect how you hold it. So I'm going to say that if you can hold it in person, obviously assume that everyone's going to be masked during the entire B, except if it is possible for health guidelines to permit your speller, when it is a speller's turn to spell, when it is the speller's moment to spell, that person will pull the mask down and spell the words so the judges can see the mouth of the child, and then we'll replace the mask immediately. I'm hoping that will be satisfactory to all schools, but of course, everyone just needs to figure out what works in their context. And this is the method that we're intending to use for the Fairfax County B, with the intention that in March, we're going to be able to hold it in person at Lake Braddock Secondary School. So, and dealing with COVID virtual B. So if you can't do an in-person B, if it just doesn't work for your school, you have two options. You can hold the B like this, live via screens on Zoom or anything else. You're still going to need to follow the same procedures. You're still going to need the same B officials. You're going to need a pronouncer. You're going to need judges. You're going to need an MC. And the only change in the situation, I would say, is that Scripps suggests strongly that you don't have an appeals process, meaning an appeal can be made to reinstate a speller if the speller has been eliminated. Those appeals typically come from the audience, and Scripps suggests strongly you don't consider any appeals when you're doing a live via screens option because the microphone situation is so dodgy. So that makes life easier. Now, the other option, if you don't want to go live, is you can go dull. Scripps wouldn't like me to say that, but you can use Scripps's online testing platform. And this is accessible through your school's homepage on spellingbee.com. On the left-hand side, there, once you get to the homepage, on the left-hand side, there's a blue column and you select online testing platform and you create and schedule a series of tests which Scripps administers. It's all done through computer. There's no personal interaction. And for this particular training, you don't need a judge and you don't need a pronouncer because it's essentially a written test. It's either a written test or multiple choice or a mix thereof. But you do have that virtual option if holding a B in person just isn't possible. You could always do it outside, but and doing it live via screens is just too annoying. So you could do the online testing platform for even just a portion of your B. You could use it as a preliminary way to sort people down if you need to get a smaller number for an in-person B. So, or you could just use it entirely for your B altogether. But for an online testing platform, no personnel are needed except the organizer to click the buttons to put the tests together. So that's what COVID does affecting us. Okay, so if you're going to do an oral B, which is this gold standard, you're going to need some basic equipment. So let's assume that we're doing an in-person B. Who do you need? What do you need? When do you need it? How much do you need? And where can you find it? So this is, again, orienting everyone. I know this for judges and pronouncers, but this is, since some people may never have attended a B before or seen the National Spelling Bee, I just want to give everybody the context. So who do you need? You need a master of ceremonies. And I'm going to assume in vast majority of cases, the person who's going to be the host is the person who knows the most, who's the B coordinator. And your job is to make sure the event runs smoothly, et cetera, et cetera. So you can imagine you need one pronouncer. And that person's job, as you can see, is to give the word information to the spellers and deliver the judge's verdict. The pronouncer, key point, is not involved in judging. So you're going to need 3 judges. And those people evaluate this if a speller has spelled correctly. And they also enforce the rules according to that marvelous piece of paper called the Rules for Local Spelling Bees. You also might need 2 or 3 general helpers for a speller check-in, handing out prizes, crowd control, that kind of thing. And those people, you don't really need to train at all. You just need to point and say, please. And they hopefully will be nice and do what you ask. So as I said, I'm going to cover the finer points of the pronouncer and judges roles a little bit later, but these are the individuals you need for your oral B if it's going to get going. So what do you need? You need pronouncer guides for an oral B. And you have 2 choices, classroom level and school level. So as I was talking earlier with Ricardi, people in schools hold Bs in all sorts of forms. Some people have just one single event for all comers. And for that B, they'd use the school level B, school level pronouncer guide. Suppose you might have classroom level Bs or maybe some preliminary Bs. You would use the classroom level pronouncer guides for any preliminary B before that school level B. So you need that, and you need the rules for local spelling bees, and you need judging sheets. And happily, you can download all these materials from your school's homepage on spellingbee.com. This is why you pay, or your school paid, $175 to get access to all of Scripps' copyrighted materials. Okay, so how many do you need? Pronouncer guide, whichever one you're using for your B, you're going to need 2. You're going to make a printed copy for your pronouncer. And that person is going to have that about a week before the B and write notes in it. They need a printed copy to work with at the B itself. And you're going to have a second printed copy in a binder for your judges at the judges table. And the judges are going to refer to that. Rules for local spelling bees. You're going to need 15 per B, 5, 1 for each one of your officials. Pronouncer, 3 judges and an MC, and 10 for the audience. In case there are any appeals, you want to have the rules available to the audience. Usually no one picks up a copy, but it is part of the rules to make the rules publicly available. So you wave them around at the beginning of the B and say, here they are, here are the Post-its and pens, should there be any appeals. So that's what you need. And judging sheets. And I would say you need about 100 of those. And Scripps has a judging sheet you can download from their site, or you could use a simple piece of lined paper. The most important thing with a judging sheet is that you have a column for a number, the spelling numbers, a column, at least for the first round, for the spellers' names, and a column for writing down for the judges to write down the word, and then a 4th column for whether or not that word was correctly spelled or incorrectly spelled. You can, so pre-printed, fine, but if you're desperate, you can just use loose leaf paper. We have occasionally run out of judging sheets, and loose leaf paper have been what we've used for the reserves. So as I said, 25 per judge and 25 extra for the MC to hold just in case. So where do you find this stuff? As I said, all of these materials are available from your homepage on Scripps' site, spellingbee.com. Key point, before I show you where they are, if you haven't taken a look at the site yet via your homepage, all these materials are protected by copyright. You can't post a single thing on the web without password protection. And Scripps goes bananas, and they're constantly searching to see if their stuff is out there, easily available, easily Googleable. They don't like it. And pronouncer guides, these are the competition guides that you use on B day only. They cannot be shared with anyone except B officials, and may only be used on B day. They can't be posted on the web, and they can't be used as B study material. I do know some schools are happy to give the pronouncer guide over to their school champion to study before the Fairfax County B. Not kosher. I won't know it, but it's not kosher. You shouldn't be doing that. And it does say that very clearly in the rules, that the pronouncer guides are not to be shared with anyone, and only opened, more or less, open publicly on B day, and then after that they are closed. Okay, so let's show you where you can find this stuff. For those people who haven't had a chance to look at their homepage, this is Fairfax County Test School, that brilliant school of FCCPTA. Scripps has been very kind to set me up my own fake school so that I can see what you guys see when you open up your system. When you put in your login, your username and your password, you can find these things. So as you see, I've circled with my clumsy red pointer where we're going to go. Classroom Spelling Bee, School Spelling Bee. You can see above the Classroom Spelling Bee, there's that online testing platform. If you choose to explore the online testing platform, obviously that's where you can find it. So going from, let's start with Classroom Spelling Bee first. If you're in a classroom, you click on the Classroom Spelling Bee button, and you get this page where you have how-to, study lists, competition guides, and rules. So this is where you find your pronouncer guides for the classroom level. These are the Bs that would be preliminary before your school level B that produces your school champion that will go on to the county B. So you click on competition guides, and you will come here. You will get this screen. If your classroom B will be spelling only, you'll have, which is typically what my school ends up using. We use the spelling bee only classroom guide, but if you wanted to include vocabulary in your B, There's a one with a word meaning supplement. You could download that. And then you see at the bottom of the page, there is Scripps' official record keeping sheet that you can look at and see if that's something that you'd like to use. So, and this is also a little point, as I've already said, you could use spelling vocabulary. Most people stick to spelling, but that's what that slide's about. Okay, so where are you going to find the rules? The rules in the classroom spelling bee spot, they're actually in the same spot in the school spelling bee tab, but you look over here on the far right, and that's where you can find the rules, again, downloadable. And this is, the rules are your guide, obviously, for what happens on bee day. It also has an initial page which talks about who can qualify to be in the spelling bee. Usually most kids qualify if they're still in 8th grade. The only kids who can't participate, or at least can't continue on to county level or national level, are those who are really far academically and have already taken an SAT or an ACT, but that doesn't apply to most of the people we're talking to. So that's where you can find the rules in the classroom spelling bee setting. And here we go to the school spelling bee, and it's the same thing. Again, click on the school spelling bee tab. There are the competition guides right up there. And then same sort of thing, spelling bee, if you're going to have a pronouncer guide with spelling only, spelling and word meaning, and the spelling bee spelling record keeping sheet. And then where do you find the rules? And the rules for classroom spelling bees are the same as the rules for the school spelling bees. So it's all very simple and nicely repetitive. But if you haven't had a chance to cruise around your school's homepage on spellingbee.com, I really would. It takes about 30 minutes to go through everything. Scripps has all sorts of videos, a lot of good information that you may or may not choose to use. Also, over here, you'll see below school spelling bee, it says local area spelling bee. You click on that. That gives you information about the Fairfax County spelling bee, the information we have thus far, meaning the date and the structure. Obviously, things can change with COVID, but there's a lot of information you can access. Okay, next page. Okay, bee basics, the bee procedure. So it's bee day. Your spellers have their little competition numbers on. They're seated in order. The MC has made the introductory remarks, gone over the key points of the rules for local spelling bees. Everyone seems to understand it. And the MC says, yeah, rah, rah, we're all here. Let's get going. So what happens? So this is what happens. The pronouncer gives the word. Every spelling bee happens in rounds. And a round is complete when every speller has had the chance to spell once. So if you have 60 spellers, a round is speller 1 through 60. And round 2 starts with speller number 1, or speller number 1 came out in round 1. It'll start with the next speller in that order. So the pronouncer calls the spellers up one by one and gives them each a word. And they all get a different word. Words are not repeated. Each person gets an individual word. And the process is this, it's very basic. Speller number 1, please stand. And reading from the pronouncer guide, this pronouncer gives the speller his or her word. So for example, speller number 1, your word is baby. Now, Scripps has in the pronouncer guide usually a couple of words that some information that they would like you to read in addition, they would like the pronouncer read in addition to the word to the speller to give that speller some starting information. So the pronouncer says, speller number 1, your word is baby. The pronouncer reads that information and then waits for the speller to respond. Okay, now the next step, we hope, is that we hope the speller won't just rush in and know, yes, I know what baby is, B-A-B-B-Y. No, now we spelled babby and made a mistake. No, that's not what you want. You want your speller, you hope, to take a breath and to repeat the word. And the pronouncer is encouraged to remind the speller to repeat the word. It's not necessary, but it's really helpful because repeating the word, having the speller repeat the word is the only way the judges will know that the spellers actually heard the word correctly. And it gives the judges the chance, if the speller is mispronouncing the word that's been given, to ask the pronouncer to say the word again to the speller and have the speller try again. And the judges can go back and forth. The officials are not required they're not required by the rules to unequivocally determine whether or not the speller has understood the word correctly or heard the word correctly, but they are supposed to make a good faith effort. But you can't spend minutes and minutes doing this. But 4 or 5 times if a speller has either orthodonture, a speech impediment of some sort, or perhaps is not hearing correctly, to figure out that giving the speller a chance to pronounce the word and see whether or not, make sure they understand what they've got, and then you move on. So the speller hopefully repeats the word. Okay, so what if you have spelling option number 1, the speller repeats the word and then the speller takes off and spells immediately. This happens. The judges this is scenario number 1. It happens 50% of the time, especially early in the B. The spellers are nervous. So the judges have to be ready to look at the speller and be prepared to write down anything, because it can happen like a shot. So that the judges have to be ready to watch and listen to the speller. Hopefully, in most cases, the speller will have a little bit more presence of mind and maybe calmer, and as I said, will behave more deliberately, and spelling option number 2 will happen instead. So after repeating the word, spelling option number 2 is the speller tries to puzzle this out and uses what are known as the questions. So the speller is permitted to ask the pronouncer specific questions about the word. And this is a nice conversation between the speller and the pronouncer. And I often say to the spellers in my introductory remarks, enjoy this conversation, enjoy this moment, relax. We're just here to hear you. Ask those questions. So the speller can ask specific questions, and only these. They can ask the pronouncer to repeat the word, to use the word in a sentence, to give the word's definition, to give the words part of speech, to give the words language of origin, and to give any alternate pronunciations of the word provided in the pronouncer guide, or to repeat the answers to any of these questions. So the speller can ask the questions to a point again. All this information, happily for the pronouncer, is provided in the pronouncer guide. So this person is not ad-libbing at all. So how the pronouncer responds to these questions. The pronouncer will read the information provided in the pronouncer guide to answer the questions. So this exchange, as I said, between the speller and the pronouncer only. The speller may not ask the judges, and no other questions are allowed. Commonly, you will have spellers trying to slide in, can you say the word more slowly? So perhaps they can hear the vowels in there. Are there any other definitions? Because often scripts will be tricky and they'll provide one definition, but they won't provide all the definitions that a word might have. And a good response to an inappropriate question for the pronouncer is to say, I cannot answer that question, and to remind the speller that such questions are not permitted by the rules. So you can sort of politely shut them down if someone's persistent. So as I said, the pronouncer responds. And now you have the spelling. So after a reasonable time, at the judge's discretion, the speller's got to spell. So the speller to spell should repeat the word again to let the judges know he or she is about to spell. It's recommended, not required. Speller pulls down his mask. If it's allowed, faces the judges, spells the word. Now this is what the judges should be doing while staring at the speller's mouth. The judges, and I would just do this, staring and writing, not looking down at your paper, staring at the mouth and writing at the same time. The judges have to write down every letter they hear on their judging sheets. The speller you should expect the speller to repeat the word again after spelling to let the judges know she or he is finished. It's recommended, not required. And the speller then waits for the judge's verdict. So the judgment. Now I know it all should sound like so easy, but sometimes it's important to go through these details. The judges confer, they look at their written results, and they compare those results to the word written in the pronouncer guide. If it's spelled correctly, the judges signal this to the pronouncer with a nod or a glance. The pronouncer says that is correct. The speller sits back down and waits for his or her turn in the next round. If the word is spelled incorrectly, one of the judges will ring the bell or some other tool that you're using to indicate that. The pronouncer will say, I'm sorry, that is incorrect. And she or he will give the speller the correct spelling of the word, and the unsuccessful speller is now out. So it's one and done. The speller can sit down, or there are various different ways that spellers can come out of the B. They can walk out immediately. I prefer to excuse the spellers who have been unsuccessful in groups and have them come out to applause. I call and say speller number 5, number 50, number 2000. please come out and collect your prize. And everybody, I start clapping, the audience claps, the other spellers clap, and they sort of come out in a nice happy wave and go collect their participation prize in their water bottle, rather than having, speller number 5 go out and then sort of disappear in silence to the prize table. It's just sort of a sad moment. And I want everybody to sort of come out on a high and recognize that achievement. So the bee basically continues in rounds, with spellers being eliminated as they go, until a champion emerges. Now there is a special end of bee procedure that's just a little bit different. And I'm going to get to that a little bit later. So next. Okay, now that you understand how the, I'm actually just going to click on something. Oh, here we go. So that's better. Now that you understand how the bee works in principle and how the bee officials fundamentally behave, how everyone's going, we're going to go into the details. So let's go. Oops, and that doesn't work. Okay, I have to go back here. That was my, okay, we're going to do this. Okay, details. Who can serve? I'm now going to try a new method of switching pages without making little bings. Who can serve? Basically anyone. Your grandmother could serve. Your high schooler could serve. But basically anyone can serve as a judge or a pronouncer who the coordinator feels would do the job competently and fairly. Key about the pronouncer, and this is big, try to have someone who has a newscaster accent, a neutral, and of course neutral is that funny word because we all have accents. I don't perceive that I have one, but of course we all do. But someone who has American newscaster accent, just very flat. I have had in the past, I experienced pronouncers who had a beautiful Southern accent. It was lovely, and it just sent the spellers into the stratosphere because it affected their pronunciation of the word to the spellers, and then the reading out of the word information, and especially spellers for whom English is not a first language, it just drives them batty. So please, so the pronouncer, that is the one thing, try to have someone who has a neutral accent if at all possible. Okay, this is a key point. May us spellers parent serve? Yes. And in the past, I have thought, no way. And then I thought about it and I thought, yeah, this is possible. And I have a couple of caveats on this. Okay, or a couple of sidelines. Basically, the bee officials serve in public. And if a parent is serving as a judge, a parent as a pronouncer, fine. It's the parent judge, which is an interesting sensitivity. If a parent judge is trying to swing other judges' decisions in favor of their child when a child has made an error, this is just so bloody obvious. I would think that that parent would be discouraged from doing that, just because it would be clear. And also, if there's an audience and fellow bee officials, obviously the bee officials would have to say, no, thank you. That's not, your child spelled the word backwards. Unfortunately, that is not correct. But it's one of those things. I do think being in the public space, if any parent who were serving as a judge felt that their child just had to go through, that they would be discouraged in that behavior. That is my thought. Much more likely, it's a problem if a parent is a judge, that you're going to freak your child out. So, and your child is going to make an error because as they're spelling or having a conversation with a pronouncer, they're staring at mom or dad and perhaps thinking that mom or dad may betray feelings of anxiety, which sends the speller into nerves. And so really, I think the bigger problem with having a parent serve is that it disturbs the speller. And so if a parent wants to serve, then it is really important, I think, for that parent to ask his or her child, may I serve? Is that going to upset you? Are you going to be okay? Because you don't want to send your child out because he or she was nervous looking in the eyes of mom or dad. So I'd let the speller decide. The other thing is that sometimes parents who sign up to be bee officials forget that if their child comes out of the bee early, before the end, that they can't go home. So someone else has to take their child home. So the official who signed up, who's a parent, has got to remember that their commitment is through the whole bee process, not just until their child comes out of the bee. So those are my thoughts about parents. So who can serve as judge or pronouncer? Okay, let's look at the pronouncer in detail. Okay, as I said, the pronouncer's fundamental role is to pronounce the word for the speller and to provide the speller with the words for full information exactly as it is given in the pronouncer guide. You are reading directly from the text. You cannot screw up. And the pronouncer gives us information in response to the speller's questions and following the text, if directed to do so by instructions printed in the pronouncer guide. So we're going to look at an example of an old pronouncer guide. So here, let's look at this the pronouncer guide. Word number 1 is hen. So you see here these instructions. Say to the speller, this word could be confused with another word. So for example, how the pronouncer would present this is speller number 1, your word is hen. Now this word could be confused with a similar word. And then it says here with the instructions, say the word, then provide the words, part of speech and definition. So then you would look here for part of speech, noun, and definition, a female chicken. And then the pronouncer would wait. So the pronouncer is given the word and followed the instructions in the pronouncer guide for any additional information. And then the pronouncer would wait for the speller to repeat the word and then to ask those particular questions. So everything is here. So if the speller said, would you please give me the definition? A female chicken, it's right there. Would you please give me the sentence? Mr. Robert's hen laid several eggs. It's all right there. There's no ad-libbing. If the speller says, are there any alternate pronunciations of hen? No, there aren't. It says here, no alternate pronunciations. So the pronouncer should not be afraid about serving in this position because this information is all right there and there's nothing for them to do. The only thing the pronouncer has to think about is the pronunciation itself. And preparing beforehand to make sure if there are any words that are difficult for him or her to pronounce, that they have done some research on, I would use the internet, to make sure that they can pronounce the word correctly. So that's an example of what a pronouncer guide would look like. So the pronouncer's role. So as the B continues, the pronouncer moves forward in the list. Speller 1 gets the first word, speller 2 gets the second word, continuing on. And you give 1 word per speller. Now words can be skipped, but only in consultation with the judges, and I'm going to go into details later. So as I said before, the pronouncer only gives word information and announces the judge's decision. The pronouncer never determines whether a word has been spelled correctly or not. That's the judge's job exclusively. And I stress this because I have seen a situation in which the judges were somewhat confused and the pronouncer stepped in and said a word was incorrect when it was correct, and it created a great brouhaha. So pronouncer, you're the conversationalist. You're the kid's lifeline to the pronouncer guide. Judges, you're the silent ones, and you're going to give the judgment. So continuing on, pronouncer's role. Okay, prep in the pronouncer guide. Coordinators, this is where I need your help. The pronouncer should receive that printed copy of the pronouncer guide from the coordinator at least a week before the B, because they've got to review the pronouncer guide to make sure they can pronounce the words correctly, and to use the internet if you can't, and use the pronouncer guide with confidence during the B so you know where to look. And also to rule out any words that he or she might wish to skip. Sometimes there are words that, or a sentence in the pronouncer guide, it hasn't happened recently, which somehow seem appropriate. I mean, everybody's school context is different. There may be a word that seems just not appropriate for the place and the time, and you can skip those. You just have, as a pronouncer, you just have to let the judges know that you're skipping it. So you're skipping from, skipping word 45, moving to word 46. Essential reading, you can't just do this the night before, maybe you could, but it is really important in the pronouncer guide. Page 3, guidelines for pronunciation and language of origin, and page 4, tips for conducting your classroom school B. Make notes. If you're a pronouncer, draw all over your pronouncer guide. Anything that is useful, it is your tool to use, and you should have it help you. So what to watch for in the pronouncer guide? Okay, the words in the pronouncer guide are arranged in ascending order of difficulty. The first 225 are from the word study list that the kids got. So if the children have studied their word study list, they will recognize the first 225 words. Now, if you manage to have the kids spell successfully through word number 225, word 226 starts the challenge section. These are words that the spellers have not had a chance to study. Scripps marks this break in the pronouncer guide. It doesn't just sort of appear out of the blue. They say, here are the challenge words. And the challenge words exist to exactly that, provide challenge. Also, this is a game. The B is a game. And eventually, everyone needs to go home at night. So we need to find a way for it to end. So if the word study list, they've knocked those out of the park, it's time to give them more challenge with the challenge words and try to sort the kids out. And this is really a rather fun part. I think when the challenge words come, it's nice for the pronouncer to say, we've hit the challenge words. We've exhausted the study list. I mean, this is a moment for the spellers to congratulate themselves at having this great achievement. Now they get to use their puzzling skills. This is where using the spellers' questions is really helpful to them. So many more conversations between the speller and the pronouncer are going to be happening now as the kids ask those questions to try to break these words down. So the key thing to notice in this great challenge section, now that we've celebrated it, is that it can be very annoying. The first words of the challenge section, if you don't know what's coming at you, often appear, and I will say are, substantially easier than the last words of the studied section. I mean, you end with Archaeopteryx and you start with banana. I mean, come on. So obviously, if you go from study words, yes, they have studied them, to the beginning of the challenge words, and the scripts decides what means a challenge word. Maybe it's a language of origin, but the challenge words, I would strongly suggest that the pronouncer and judges agree ahead of time, if they get to the challenge section, how far ahead they're going to skip, so that the last word at the end of the word study list, word number 225, the next word they're going to pick from the challenge section seems roughly equivalent, or at least an appropriate jump. Because if you're in the middle of a round and you jump into the challenge section and someone else, the one person has just gotten the hardest word in the word study list, and someone gets the easiest word in the challenge section, there's a big difference. And it can get ugly. I mean, you have the gasps in the audience, like, what? How did that happen? How did my child get, titter totter, or, some very simple word when the previous, how did my child get the really hard word and someone else got a very simple word? So I would strongly suggest that judges and pronouncers, you decide ahead of time where in the challenge section you want to restart once you enter in there. But careful consideration, usually it's around 10 words. But as I said here, no one wants a situation in which diacritical is followed by great, because it's not fair to the spellers. So that's just something to keep in mind. So that's one situation in which skipping is very, very valid. But again, skipping ahead, not skipping back. So moving on. So as I said, the judges and pronouncers, obviously this is an interplay between these officials. In order for everything to work smoothly, they've got to communicate and coordinate. So in addition to the pronouncer having a conversation with the spellers, it's also the pronouncer's responsibility before each conversation with a new speller that the judges are ready. You don't just say if one person has spelled a word correctly or incorrectly, okay, speller number 36, off we go. No, look at the judges, make sure they're all ready with their pencils before starting with the new speller, and confirm with the judges about which word by number in the pronouncer guide. As you remember, all the pronouncer guide words are by number, what's next to be spelled. So everybody knows what they're looking for. And if the pronouncer wishes to skip a word, as I said, she or he must consult with the judges. Okay, skipping words, going into the details. So a pronouncer, as I said, may wish to skip a word because maybe after multiple attempts, he or she is just not sure that he or she's going to get it right pronouncing it. That's a legitimate reason to skip. Or, as I said, the word seems inappropriate for the context for whatever reason. It is also okay for a pronouncer to change a sentence if something in the example sentence seems inappropriate for the context. I can't think of an example right off the bat, but there have been some situations in the past, not the recent past, but in the past where sentences just seemed off for that particular school or those elementary kids. Nothing salacious. It just seems like tone deaf. I think that would be the proper term. So if a pronouncer skips a word for these reasons, that person has to notify the judges so everybody knows which word they're going on. As I said, skipping number 45, the next word will be 46, all clear, everyone's ready to go. So the pronouncer can also skip words if the judges decide the B's got to speed up, we can't be here all night, or the level of challenge needs to increase. Those are two aspects of the same situation. We need to speed up. We need to sort the kids down and go home. And the judges and pronouncer obviously must agree on how many words are to be skipped. And skipping words to increase a B's pace or level of challenge should be done between rounds only, never mid-round. So we go back to that jump between the word study word section and the challenge words. You want to have the level mid-round to be incremental, not a huge gap. So if you're going to skip a whole lot of words for speed or to challenge the kids, do it between the rounds. It's much more fair. And that's what Scripps recommends. So now we've dealt with the pronouncer. Let's deal with the judges. So I said the judges, they run the B, or they don't run the B, the MC runs the B. The judges administer the B according to the rules, and they are the B's final authority. So it is the judge's responsibility alone to evaluate each speller's performance. They listen and watch carefully as the speller spells. They write down exactly what they hear. They confer with their fellow judges. They check their written results against the word as given in the pronouncer guide, and together they agree on a final decision. Now, I would strongly suggest that you have 3 judges. Safety in numbers, having been part of a judging panel, sometimes when you've had rush, if you have a speller who just takes off before asking any questions or repeating the word, not everybody hears it. And it does happen. Not everybody is ready at the same time. And in that case, where a judge will say, I wasn't paying attention, and will raise his or her hand to his or her fellow judges quietly. And those 2 judges will decide. But 3 judges, when you have some delicate points, it's delicate points of discussion, it's good to have 3, not just one, not having it all rest on one person's shoulders. It's just a friendly thing to have. So the judges prep. The coordinator should meet with the judges together or separately well before the B. So not on B day, before that, to review the rules for local spelling bees and to make sure that everyone has the same understanding. And the judges obviously need to understand the rules well enough so that they can administer them confidently and consistently when addressing any questions, hopefully none, during the B that might arise. And then just before the B begins, so the kids are sitting in their chairs or they're milling around just before they sit in their chairs, the coordinator should have a little huddle with the judges and the pronouncer to make sure everybody knows what the procedures are, what the roles are going to be, to make sure that everybody's clear about what's going to happen. And also, it's just a nice refresher. The other thing that's also helpful is when the coordinator, the MC, gives that intro speech and goes over the rules, it's a refresher for the officials as well. But make sure your happiest bees run when your officials know what they're doing, obviously. Okay, the judge's procedure. As I said, the judges are supposed to watch very carefully when a speller is spelling. Key, watch. We're just presuming also the speller's able to draw down his or her mask to spell, or via Zoom, you're able to see the child's mouth. You're going to watch the speller's lips move as the child spells, because some letters really sound similar, especially when there is a speech impediment, which kids, especially in elementary school, will have. Let me grab some water here. But so some letters may sound the same, but the lips will move differently. Hopefully you won't have to have many of these situations, but just do be aware that B's, P's, and V's, T's and D's, F's and S's, and M's and N's, when said as letters and said fast by a nervous speller, can sound similar. And so if you're paying attention to the lips and you're anticipating your speller is possibly nervous and might speak quickly, you can have a better idea of what's actually happening and what letter is meant. So you want to give your speller the benefit of the doubt. I mean, this is not meant to be a crushing experience, but it's just important to notice these sorts of things that might happen to you if you're aware that these letters can sound similar when said by a fast, braces wearing speller. Then you're going to give the child more of a chance to succeed, and you'll have a better chance of understanding that child. I had a child who was in a spelling bee and lisped when saying letters. I can't remember what the word was. But in this case, the pronouncer was a person who worked with her and was able to say the judges eliminated her because they weren't aware of her speech impediment. And the pronouncer, this is the one time when I would say the pronouncer did a good job, because of course I was in the audience and this was my kid. The pronouncer said, "I know this child, that's how she says, that's how she speaks." And so the judges gave some grace and let my daughter stay in, because the F that she had said came out as an S, so the S sounded as an F. I can't remember which, but whatever it was, the judges hadn't been aware of the speech impediment, hadn't taken it into account, but the pronouncer in that case knew what was going on. And I will deal with that issue of speech impediments also in more detail a little bit later. Okay, so watch the speller's lips move. Write down every letter while you are watching the speller. Again, confer with your judges about what you heard and you wrote. Check your results against your copy of the pronouncer guide. And if there's a disagreement about what was heard, discuss with the judges until you all agree. And if there is disagreement, I don't know what advice I can really give you other than try to resolve it. There's no sort of magic formula. It may be sort of one person says, well, actually, maybe I really didn't hear, or, and it goes with the other two. There are many sort of variants on that. You just hope there aren't that many. Okay, so the sounds that hurt. You're a judge, and I'm going to talk about the sounds that the spellers could make. And as I put it here, the sounds that hurt. Well, in the process of spelling, the speller is expected to say only letters. But the fact is, according to the rules, the speller is responsible for any sound during the spelling process that she makes or he makes. And according to the rules, if we're going to be really brutal and strict, an unintelligible sound or nonsense sound will get you disqualified. And that includes what we all do every day, which is we stammer, we stutter, and we say, while we're thinking about things. So if a speller's in the middle of the word, pauses and says, that could sound like M. That could be M. That, according to the rules, the judge can take you out. So it's up to the judges to decide to forgive the spellers who make these sounds or not. But if you were, as a group, you're going to decide to forgive all spellers who make any sort of these in-between sounds of and I wouldn't recommend it, just because it's hard sometimes to apply consistently. And but anyway, it's up to you to decide. I'd say it's better to be strict and just make clear what the rules are and what the standards are from the very beginning, so everybody understands it's a game. It has sticky rules, and that's how we get from 60 people to one person in the end. That's how the game is played. I can tell you at the Fairfax County level, any sort of mumbles or uhs, the judges will take you out, because we have to abide at the county level when we're dealing with all the school champions, and our champion is going to the National Spelling Bee. We have to apply the rules for local spelling bees extremely strictly. So just to let you know that. So sounds that hurt, sounds that don't hurt. A speller is judged on correct spelling only. So there are some words that are in the pronouncer guide that involve capital letters like Camelot, or punctuation or spaces, and those don't matter. So you can find a speller who might say Camelot and is well-versed in musicals from the 1960s, one of my favorites, and says capital C, A-M-E-L-O-T, yay, and that's perfectly correct. But if Camelot is spelled C-A-M-E-L-O-T, I hope I spelled it correctly, without the capital, that's fine too. So, and if you're spelling hors d'oeuvre, or is it, you see here in the example, flip-flop, and there's a dash, and the child does not include the dash doesn't matter, diacritics don't matter, punctuation doesn't matter, spaces don't matter, capital letters don't matter, letters matter. Letters in the correct order, correct letters in the correct order, that's it. So the sounds that don't hurt are letters in the correct order. So that's great. So anything else, don't worry about it. So, and this is also obviously written in the rules. Sounds that might hurt. Now we're dealing with the speech impediments question. As I said, many kids have orthodontia or speech impediments. English isn't their first language. It might even be their fifth. So this affects how they articulate when they spell. It affects how well they're understood by B officials, especially when they're repeating the spelling word. So this is what I suggest that coordinators do to help judges and pronouncers. So judges and pronouncers, if your coordinator isn't here, ask them to do this for you. Coordinators should ask parents, maybe in the registration process or a little later on, to tell the coordinator ahead of time if the child has some sort of speech feature that the parent thinks the judges should be aware of. And also, because sometimes parents aren't aware of the speech characteristics of their children because they're used to them, ask the school speech therapist. If you can show them a list of the spellers you have and ask if there's any information he or she can give you. That will give you a lot of help, because often a school speech therapist is the children that she or he has under treatment. Actually, there are many more whom he or she is watching in the hallways and occasionally having a conversation with and seeing how the language is developing, language production is developing. So they know, they are watching things that parents really may not be aware of at all. So it's nice to have those details because, again, it helps prevent misunderstanding. It helps keeping kids in the B rather than removing them because of information we didn't have. So as I said here, the coordinator gathering that information should tell the judges and pronouncer on B day, provide them with a list. Speller number 4 has this characteristic, so that they can watch and be aware and give some mercy or grace as is necessary. So you see here, I have a wonderful example of speller number 10. Oh, with a dollar sign, wonderful. I was really tired. Where FR comes out as FW, like French fry becomes the classic French fry. So that would affect the child repeating the word. So did the child hear correctly, or is that just how the child says things? It's good to have that on a piece of paper to know that in advance if you're a judge. And lisps are classics. And again, it's great if you're an official and you know this ahead of time, so you can save a child rather than having a child be miserably removed just because that's the way he or she says things. So, okay. So now we're going to go into those judging scenarios that everyone is wondering about. Sticky moments. So one of them is, I've gone through the basic structure of a B and how spelling happens. Sort of 1, 2, 3. Now we see pronouncer gives the word, speller repeats the word, asks some questions, spells the word, judges judge. Okay, so that's presuming everything's in a nice straight line. So imagine the pronouncer is given the word, the spellers ask the questions or not. The speller starts to spell and stops in the middle. Is this okay? The answer is yes. So once a speller starts spelling a word, the speller can stop in the middle, and it can happen in a variety of ways. There could be, spelling the word la la la. My word is baby, B-A, pause for reflection, or just pause for breath, or any number of things, but you can have this pause. Okay, so when you've had this pause, the word is baby, B-A, pause, what happens? You could do 2 things. The speller could say B-A, B-Y. Great, correct letters in the correct order. Wonderful, very clear. Okay, the other option is the speller can start the word over from the beginning, and this is where it gets tricky. And this is what I call the stickiest rule, and kids come out in this all the time. This is a true heartbreaker. So when the speller wants to restart, so this is what we do every single day of our lives. We start a sentence, our mind changes in the middle of the sentence, and then we restart the sentence and go in a different direction. This is what kids do in spelling. They just do. So it's if they're not sure about how a word is going to continue. So for example, my word is baby, B-A-B-Y. I've now just spelled ba baby. So yeah, when I restarted, I got it right because suddenly I got this moment of inspiration, but I've just spelled ba baby, B-A-B-A-B-Y. So I'm out of here. And that's just really unfortunate. It just so goes against, this rule goes against everyone's instinct, everyone's process of thinking. You stop to think and then you restart your thought. Well, unfortunately, you're in a world of hurt if you're a speller, but you can restart in a way that is permitted by asking the judges before you restart, please, may I restart? or may I start over? The judges give you permission, and they always will. The child can respell. So if I started B-A, pause, may I restart? Yes, you may restart. B-A-B-Y, great. Now, if my word was baby, and I said B-O, I've just realized I'm spelling it wrong. So I've said B-O, pause. May I restart? Yes, you may restart. B-A-B-Y, no, they also will be dinged, because when you restart, the speller has to use the same letters he or she previously said and in the same order. You can't change a thing. So if the speller made a mistake, you can't correct it. So that it makes spellers miserable if they aren't aware that they can't correct. You can't. Once you've started spelling, you're responsible for every single letter you say. And if you're going to restart, you have to ask the judge's permission. And if the judges have to be so aware and watch and make sure that if a speller does restart, did the child get permission or not? If they did not, they're out. If they did, if the child used the letters, the same letters that previously said and in the same order, and then continued to spell correctly, yay, then we're all fine. But the bottom line to make clear to judges and to spellers is once a letter's been said, it can't be unsaid. And the speller has to ask if they want to restart. And that's just, it just goes against all instincts. It's so tough. So I just gave those examples of what to do. Successful respelling and unsuccessful respellings, or shall we say in this case, actually 2 unsuccessful respellings, ba baby and BO, correcting my baby thing. Okay, so end of B procedures. I said the B proceeds with eliminating spellers left and right. You go through various rounds. So now you've only got a few spellers left. And this MC should pause the B and review the end of B procedure because it's just a little bit different. And the officials should, having known their rules, should know that, but it's important to let spellers in the audience to know about that as well. So the end of B procedure is in rules section 10, but basically it's like this. So say you have 5 spellers left. And what happens is you have 5 spellers, and each one of the spellers is given their words. 4 of them spell successful, let me start again. 4 of them spell unsuccessfully. They stay in their seats. The 5th one, or one of the 5, spells successfully. So those 4 don't walk away. Those 4 that did not spell correctly stay in their seats because something next is going to happen. So say we were in round 30 with these 5 spellers. Round 30, each one of the spellers got their word. 4 did not spell correctly, 1 did. Now, this is how a champion is determined. This one speller who spelled correctly in that round will rise up to round 31, which is called a championship round. If that child spells that championship word he or she receives next correctly, he or she is the B champion. And all the other kids are tied for first runner-up. And you guys will have to figure out how to determine a first runner-up, because that can be done in a variety of ways. But anyway, so that's one scenario. Champion's been determined by successful spelling of a championship word. Champion's determined. All the rest of the kids remaining in round 30, those 4 who spelled unsuccessfully, are tied for first runner-up. So what happens if the championship word round in round 31, the child doesn't spell it correctly? Now that child literally falls back. We start round 32 in the spelling order with all 5 spellers again. And we do this process. Could be, I've seen it where a child went up to a championship round, didn't spell successfully, went back. Then they went through a few more rounds where everybody spelled successfully or everybody spelled unsuccessfully, continue on through rounds. And then another child spelled successfully, was the only survivor, and then goes on to a championship round, spells unsuccessfully, falls back. It can happen. It can go on for a while, or you can have one championship round and that will decide it. So it's just a little bit different. That's a general review, but go to rules section 10. It will go through that in a little bit more detail, but that's the fundamentals. So it's the only time where you can spell wrong and still I can't say anything. You can spell incorrectly and still stay in the B. So that's just an interesting difference, but it's something to be aware of. Okay, sticky judging scenario. What if we run out of words? It happens. It does happen, not frequently, but it happens. Okay, if your school has had spelling bees in the past, you may have past printed out pronouncer guides on hand. Pull it out, pull back an old pronouncer guide, hopefully not last year's pronouncer guide, but the year before. Start in the challenge words. Judges and pronouncer decide where they're going to start, and you go on from there. So suppose you don't have a spare pronouncer guide in hand. The MC will pause the bee and say, congratulations, we blew through the pronouncer guide. All of you survivors are fabulous. And you get together at a later date with your bee officials and those remaining spellers. And again, use the challenge words from a previous year's pronouncer guide. Suppose you run out of time. You don't just run out of words, you run out of time. Same scenario. MC pauses the bee, says we're going to reconvene at a later date, maybe at the principal's office or in a classroom, whenever you can get some officials and remaining spellers. You don't have to have the same officials. Judge that second bee, just people you have on hand. You can, because it could be in the school context, those people who were serving before aren't able to serve, just retrain those individuals, train new individuals to serve and have it work that way. If you need an older pronouncer guide, if you think you might run out of words, you just want to have one in hand and you don't have any spare ones, contact me and I can send you a PDF. I have years and years of old pronouncer guides. So back to 2014, I think. So certainly you can go far enough back that if your spellers are experienced in the bee, they won't have encountered some of those words. So that's one of the judging scenarios. What if we run out of words? And we're done with that. Okay, this is the fun one. The appeal. What is it and how to prepare for it? And everybody hates it. Okay, so an appeal to reinstate a speller may be made by an audience member. If you don't have an audience, appeals can't be made. So maybe COVID is a good thing. So it can be made by an audience member if that person believes that the speller was eliminated by the judges due to a judging error. Appeals to remove a speller are absolutely not allowed. So some parent who is grumpy that her child came out and the next child didn't come out may not say speller number 6 needs to be removed for thus and such reason. No way, won't be considered. But to reinstate, only to reinstate, those appeals may be considered. So again, going back to what I talked about earlier in this presentation, to be prepared for appeals, the bee coordinator should come to the bee with 10 printed copies of the rules for local spelling bees and the post-it note and the pen. Before the bee begins, go over the appeals protocol, which I'm going to go through now. Show the audience where they can find the rules if they have any questions, and the post-it notes if they need to make an appeal. And that's how you need to sort of prepare on the bee day. Okay, so what happens during an in-person bee? This is actually what happens. And this is all covered in a full page on the rules for local spelling bees called appeals. And I'm just going to go through some brief aspects of it. But it is all gone through in detail, section 11 of the rules. The rules are about 5 or 6 pages long, and this goes through a number of different scenarios. So if you're in an in-person bee, the appeal has to be submitted to the MC, not the judges, in writing, using those post-it notes or any other scrap, as soon as there's an issue. No one can raise their hands and say, hey, my kid, or that shouldn't have happened. No raised hands or voices. So, and the appeal, if at all possible, has got to be given in the round in which it occurred. If you have someone who's eliminated at the very end of the round, the judges can obviously consider that. But what you want to do is have that appeal given in either during the round or in the break between rounds. If a new round is started, it's too late. So there usually is a few moments break, I'd say probably like 30 seconds to a minute between when one round ends and everyone gets reorganized for the second round. Maybe the kids are having a stretch. There's plenty of time to submit an appeal if you are concerned about it. So an appeal that's submitted in a round afterwards, no, but submit it during the break or during the same round. So it's got to identify the speller, the number and the name, or at least the number, if the name isn't known, the word, and the problem. So So this is what you do. During a virtual B, your problem is easy because the appeals can't happen. Scripps suggests that during virtual Bs, meaning anything's happening live via screens, just don't even entertain the possibility. There just won't be appeals. Announce that, and that's fine with them because there are just too many possibilities of audio difficulties and distortions. So if your virtual B will not allow appeals, tell the spellers in your audience before the B begins so everybody understands that. Okay, so the protocol. Upon receiving a written appeal, the MC will suspend the B and give the appeal to a panel of judges. So I've gotten a piece of paper here from a parent, and I say, we're between spellers, excuse me, we've received an appeal, the judges need to consider it. So the judges will look at the appeal. This is what they do. They review their record sheets. So they look at the appeal, they see the problem. They're going to go back immediately to their record sheets. They're going to see speller number 6, the situation, and they're going to look at it again. And they're going to consult, if they need to, section 11 of the rules. Often, if the judges decided that a child is out, they'll look down at their written sheets and they'll see that the child should have been out. Yes, there was no discussion. But if necessary, they'll consult section 11 of the rules. They'll give their verdict, and that's it. If they want to give their reasoning, they can. They don't have to. They don't have to explain anything. It's nice to know why. But certainly, if no one in the audience can protest and say, I don't agree. Well, too darn bad. The judge's appeals are final. If you have someone who says, I don't agree, well, then the MC can request a helper to escort them to the door. So, and rejected appeals may not be resubmitted, and new versions of rejected appeals, meaning with new reasons as to why there was official misconduct, as to why the child was eliminated, will not be accepted. So one and done, and the judge's appeals decisions are final, period, stop. So how do the judges make their decisions? As I said, when considering appeal, the judges will abide by section 11, appeals of the rules. And obviously during the review of the rules, when the judges are prepping, you're supposed to pay particular attention to this section. So the nice thing about the appeals section is that it has various scenarios, A through E, where it goes through and gives us scenarios. So for example, I'm just going to, you can look at these yourself. So number B, it says scenario is the speller correctly spelled a homonym of the word in question. Judges, did the pronouncer provide a definition? Refer to rule number 5. If no, reinstate the speller. If yes, deny the appeal. So it goes through 5 different possible scenarios that can be very helpful to the judges, very stepwise. That's a nice new thing that Scripps has done. Okay, this is the other thing that Scripps did, which is very helpful, called invalid grounds for reinstatement. And I actually think I will read this out. Okay. It used to be that Scripps didn't have such a long list of what I would say are judge protections or judge and pronouncer protections. As you see here on my sheet, blaming the officials is what I would also call invalid grounds for reinstatement. It says the judges will not entertain appeals on the following grounds. The pronouncer allegedly mispronounced the word and the judges didn't catch it. The pronouncer offered pronunciations and or word info that the speller didn't request, and the unrequested information contributed to the misspellings. One or all of the B officials indicated to the speller that the speller was pronouncing the word correctly, but the speller's spelling indicates that the speller wasn't pronouncing it correctly. One or all of the B officials did not inform the speller before spelling that the speller's pronunciation was incorrect, and the speller was misunderstanding the word, and this inaction contributed to the misspelling. And it goes on with this sort of thing. There are a few other options there. But the main point I want to point out is that, let's see if I have it here in this next one. No, it's in, I'll go back up. I know in past times, Scripps has been less protective of the spellers, but where the spellers misunderstand words, Scripps's basic position is this. If there was a judge didn't catch a speller's mispronunciation, or a speller or a pronouncer mispronounced the word, Scripps's stand is this: if the speller used all of his or her questions and asked them all, it is absolutely crystal clear as to which word is being offered out there. So if a word was mispronounced, I'm trying to think of an obvious thing where you have a different pronouncing word. If a word was mispronounced, and there's some question as to whether or not it was a verb or a noun, if you ask the part of speech, you'll know if it's a verb or a noun. You'll know the definition. You know the language of origin. If the speller asks all the questions, which every speller is permitted to do, it is absolutely clear what the word is. And that's Scripps' stance. So that that's why they've developed these official protections, one might say, that whether or not the pronouncer mispronounces the word and the judges don't catch it and that kind of, or the speller mispronounces the word and misunderstood, the speller's misunderstandings are the speller's responsibility. The speller chooses not to ask those questions or doesn't understand the responses to the questions, you know, doesn't accept them, doesn't utilize them. That's a speller's responsibility. And it's always, always, always the speller's choice as to when to spell. That question of some appeals I've seen have been, my child didn't ask all his or her questions. Well, that was the speller's decision. So Scripps is very clear about when the speller is spelling, they're responsible for everything they say, and they're responsible for when they choose to spell, when they think they have enough information to make the correct spelling. And that's the grounds for rejecting all of these appeals. Okay, and that goes into what audience members misunderstand here. So referring to the appeals. As I said before, if the judges agreed the first time around to remove a speller, it's very likely they're going to agree again to remove the speller when they look back at the evidence on their sheets. It's always the speller's choice to spell and when to spell. As I said, if the speller spells too quickly and stutters or repeats a letter, again, that is their responsibility. No one was rushing them except themselves. If they don't ask their questions, again, that's their choice. And often an audience member will say, well, I heard thus and such. Guess what? In a spelling bee setting, the judges are closer to the speller than the audience is, always. So you have the group of spellers, the judges and pronouncer are facing the spellers, and behind the judges and pronouncer is the audience. They are at a significant distance from the spellers. So actually the sounds an audience member thinks she or he heard are absolutely irrelevant. It only matters what the judges heard. Okay, so now we're going towards the end here. Thank goodness for you all. Resources for download. I'm going to send links to these docs that I've listed: roles for judge and pronouncer, basic judges procedure, the appeals cheat sheet, a PDF of this slideshow, and the audio recording. I'll email all of you tomorrow, and anybody else who signed up, and all the coordinators I have on my list. So you have that. And question and answers, you know where to find me if you have questions after this. Thank you for your time, and I hope I hit all your questions. And now I will stop my screen sharing and go to the chat and see what we got. All right, how many times a pronouncer? Okay, that is entirely your discretion. It's the spellers need to spell within a reasonable time. So I think that's, let me take another sip of water. If the speller is just vamping, you know, spending time and sort of wasting time, and has gotten all that information multiple times, it is very appropriate for the judge or pronouncer. Well, the judges wouldn't say anything, but the judges can signal the pronouncer, like, you know, roll eye, or the pronouncers can say, it's time to spell. We had an instance actually where the speller asked no questions a couple of years ago. It's a young child, and he stood up and he got his word and he said nothing, absolutely nothing. And the pronouncer said, would you like to hear all the word information? He nodded, and she gave him all the word information, and he said nothing. And she said, would you like to try? And he said nothing. He just stood there. And finally, she looked over to the judges. The judges are, you know, it's time. She said, I'm sorry, we have to ask you to sit back down, and we're going to go on to the next speller. So, you know, it's an interplay. If someone's really seeking information and doesn't seem to understand, spend more time. If someone's just spending time, then it is perfectly fine to say, it's time to spell now. So anybody else have any questions? You're all snoring out there gently. You can unmute yourselves if you want to ask any questions also. So, because it's just us. If you all are set, then I can bid you all good night and thank you. And thank you for being my audience and hanging in there. Yes, and I echo what Mary says, if I'm pronouncing your name correctly, Mary or Mary. You know, I hope everybody does have a wonderful bee. This COVID times are so bizarre and variable. You have lots of different options and you may just have to switch course, you know, starting with an in-person bee, oh, we got to go online, or, you know, got to do a Zoom version. It's perfectly okay. And if you need any help, just let me know. I mean, I've got experience with them all. And if you need any help from scripts, if you're having trouble with any part of your account, or in particular with the online testing platform, occasionally technical questions or technical problems can come up with that. Email them through their contact feature on spellingbee.com. They will respond to you within 24 hours. I mean, they're pretty fast, and believe me, you are their customers. They want you to be happy, and they're very nice people, and they want everyone to feel successful about the bee and come back next year. So, you know, between scripts and me, hopefully you're pretty well covered. And if you have more substantial questions, you know, obviously that can't be handled in email. I'm happy to have a phone call with anyone to deal with those in particular. So, you know where to find me. So I'll stop the recording now, and thank you all, and good night. Thank you.